Hey, everybody out there in live YouTube and Facebook land. So, you want to master NLP language patterns. Just give me 1 second here. I'm going to talk all about that. I'm not going to too long, though. All right. So, you want to master NLP language patterns. I've been studying this for at least 7 years, and I've been in sales for more than a decade. And I know the frustrations of selling, for one thing. I know how difficult that can be, and just persuasion and influence in general. And I also know the frustration of learning language patterns. And what I've realized over the years is that I've cultivated some ways of going about doing this. When you have taken practitioner trainings, master practitioner trainings in NLP, unfortunately, you don't get a lot of guidance afterward. You're kind of left on your own to learn these things and understand these things. So, how do you get good at language patterns? How do you weave language patterns into the normal conversation that you're having so it doesn't seem like you're reciting something or that you're reading from a script, which often is the case. And I think a lot of people abandon using language patterns because they use them a few times, or they remember or memorize some scripts, and then they use them a few times, and they people kind of look at them funny whenever they try using them. It's awkward and it feels strange, so people abandon them. So let's talk about language. What How do you think language works in the mind? Because I don't think a lot of people understand this. And I'm going to use an analogy of how sound travels. So when I was a kid, I remember just naturally thinking that when you get on the phone and you're talking to someone, the sound is traveling through, I don't know, electrical cords or whatever, to the person you're talking to on the other end of the phone. Now, I guess you could think the same thing. We didn't have cell phones back then when I was a kid, so we didn't think of it as like a cell phone. We had wires that went into the wall, and then the wires went into the ground, and then they travel across to wherever the person is you're talking to. And I remember watching something on TV where somebody had asked the question, well, how is it that sound can travel that fast? And the person said, well, sound doesn't travel when you're talking on the phone. If it did, it would take a long time, especially if you were talking to someone in a different country on the other side of the world. If we were relying on the speed at which sound travels, your conversations would be pretty messed up. I mean, they'd be really, really delayed. So it's not the speed of sound that makes that possible. In fact, we have jets that fly faster than the speed of sound. So I couldn't tell you all of the exact ways in which that works. I'm not I'm not here to tell you about how sound travels through airwaves and all that. But anyway, I think that's a good analogy for how we process language in our brains. And by the way, before I go any deeper with this, we can take this even deeper. I'm doing a live training tomorrow night, Wednesday night, and Thursday night on the secrets of influencing at the identity level. And it's stuff that I've never seen taught anywhere. It's stuff that I've come up with. If you want to get in on this, if you look in the description right below this video, you can see where you can opt in for that. It's absolutely free, and you can get in on that. And it's starting tomorrow, so you want to get in soon. So anyway, how do we process language in the brain, in our minds? And this is really the key to why language patterns are so effective. So a lot of people, I think, without thinking too much about it, just naturally think that we know the meaning of a word. So every time we hear a word, we go into our mind, and it quickly happens unconsciously where we look up the meaning of that word, or we recognize the meaning of that word. And so this actually is just as unlikely to happen as somebody getting on the phone and sound traveling to, the other side of the world where you're speaking to someone else in a different country on the phone. Sound is travels near instantly, if not instantly. So how is it you're processing language in your brain near instantly if you have to look up the meaning of every single word? That would be impossible. So think about it like this. If that is how language functioned in our minds, then every time if I said click subscribe right here to this YouTube channel, that means your mind would have to go click means, let me go look up the dictionary definition of the word click. Okay, click means to press something, and it would have other meanings too. You'd have to sort out like what exact meaning am I meaning by that in the context of the rest of the words. But if you'd have to go to every single word and look up every single meaning of every single word inside your mind as you're hearing me talk, you would already be way behind right now. You would still be defining the very first few words that I said at the beginning of this video. So we know right away, right now, that that is not how language is processed in your mind. So how is language processed in your mind? Well, language is processed in your mind by sensory impulses. And what do I mean by sensory impulses? That means it's coming in through something you're seeing, something you're hearing, something you're feeling, it through a representation of the five senses. Most commonly, it's visual because visually we can see a lot of information at one time. So, probably about half the population, I would say, is quite visual. So, as I'm talking, most of you are making images in your mind of what I'm saying. So, it's almost like you're watching the movie of what I'm saying. And you don't need a visual necessarily for every single word that I'm saying. You just need the visuals that represent the context, and then the rest of the words just go along, or maybe they move the movie along. So it could also be other ways too. You can also do it more auditorily. You could do it more in a feeling sense. So not everybody processes language visually, but I would say most people do. And the reason for that is because it's probably the quickest. And you can also process a lot of information visually all at once that you can't process through any other sense. So, for example, you can look at a painting and say that painting has made of 7 colors. You can identify those colors near immediately. If not immediately, you could identify 7 colors very quickly, and you can hold that information all at once in your mind as you're looking at the painting. Now, try this. Try listening to 7 people talk at the same time. You're not likely to be able to distinguish every single voice. You're going to have to, it would take focusing on one voice at a time. And some people who are really trained in sound or music or who are very auditory, some of these people actually can listen to more than one voice at a time. But even 7 would be a challenge, even for, somebody who's like the best in the world at this, trying to listen to 7 voices at the same time and making sense of them. I mean, it's just nearly impossible to think about. So we normally use the visual, but like I said, we can use other things as well. So that's what I mean by sensory impulses. Now, this is happening for most people quite unconsciously. And even if you do become conscious of it, because I'm telling it to you right now, you might say, oh, okay, I'm going to pay attention to this I'm going to pay attention to this right now as I'm listening to you, Damon. And you could do that, but there's still so much more going on unconsciously you couldn't possibly be conscious of that is processing language and understanding for you. So the majority of how you process language and how you understand what it is that I'm saying is happening unconsciously. And this is the key to making language patterns work. And this is the key to why they work. I'll give you another example or another analogy. You can be conscious that your heart is beating, but you're not consciously making your heart beat. Your heart's going to beat on its own. I can be conscious of my breathing, and I can even stop myself from breathing. I can hold my breath. But at a certain point, I'm going to pass out. And when I pass out, all the unconscious processes are going to kick in again, and I'm going to start breathing again. The majority of your existence is actually happening unconsciously. Your conscious awareness is actually quite limited. So, if so much is happening unconsciously, wouldn't that indicate that what happens unconsciously is more powerful than what happens consciously? So, what if you could understand the unconscious patterns of how you process language? And if you could do that, then you could speak directly to someone's unconscious by using those patterns and bypassing the conscious mind. because it's the conscious mind that resists information. If we don't like something, if we don't agree with something, we don't believe something, the conscious mind kicks in and says, nope, not buying it. But if you could go beyond the conscious resistance of the conscious mind and speak directly to those unconscious processes, which really make up the majority of your mind, that make up the majority of your understanding of language and the meaning you make of language and the meaning you make of your reality and the reality that you're creating, because reality is subjective. You are living inside your subjective reality, and there's no way out of that. There's no way to live from objective reality, because it's always coming in. The information's always being filtered in through your senses and the ways that you make meaning of things. So, with this understanding, you can learn language patterns and master them much faster. The language patterns of influence from NLP, a lot of people are very interested in learning these. A lot of people, and I was the same way when I first got into NLP. In fact, I thought that's all NLP was. Neuro-Linguistic Programming, I thought was just language and how to use language for influence. And then I started training in it, and I realized it was much more than that. But the language part of it is fascinating and it's interesting, and it's all out there. Like, if you wanted to, they have the meta model, the Milton model, the sleight of mouth. If you want to know these patterns without doing an NLP training, you can find these patterns anywhere. And that's sort of goes to what I'm talking about here. If those patterns are out there for everyone to access, why aren't people using them? Why aren't people using them all the time to influence and persuade, especially salespeople? I mean, some salespeople do, and some of you are using these language patterns and using them effectively. Most of you are not. And this is one of the reasons why having this understanding about how language works is really, really important to mastering language patterns. The other thing too is most people just try to memorize language patterns and then use them effectively. And you can actually do that. You can just memorize them and use them effectively. But what will start to happen is you will only get so far with that. You will start to realize that in some ways, reciting a language pattern puts more distance between you and the person you want to influence. And we all know, right, that the influencing and persuasion starts with good rapport. So if you're stuck in your head because you're trying to memorize and regurgitate and recite language patterns, you're going to break rapport with that person. And then there's that distance between you and them. So then it becomes something you're trying to do to that person. And this is the breakdown of communication. This is not going to work. So there's a better way to do this. And this is what I was talking about, going deeper with this. If you want to go deeper with this and you want to find out better ways to do this, and you want to find out ways to master influence and persuasion through language patterns, on the training that I'm doing starting tomorrow night and Wednesday night and Thursday night, you will be able to do that. So you're going to watch me basically create a training live. The training's almost done, but I decided I wanted to get input from it. So you can join this training live and watch me create it. And that's starting tomorrow. Like I said, the link is in the description. It's free. Okay. It's free. So you can jump in on this and participate in this training for free. And I'm going to go much deeper into this with persuasion and influence, not just language patterns, but I'm going to cover language patterns, and you'll learn the ways in which you can master them, and that you can use them without having to recite them. When you don't need to memorize them and then recite them. All right. So I hope you enjoyed this. I hope you want to take this deeper with me. Like I said, the training is starts tomorrow night, so you want to get in on this soon. It's basically it's called Secrets of Influence and Persuasion at the Identity level. A lot of people are using this pleasure, pain, behavioral level way of going about persuasion and influence, and that can work. It will work, but it's also very limited. So take it even further and go to the identity level. When you go to the identity level, nothing shapes someone's behavior more than their perception of themselves. And if you can persuade people to do what you're asking them to do, and to feel, and in the process, they feel good about themselves doing it because it raises their self-esteem, what could you not do as far as persuasion and influence? So take this deeper with me. join me tomorrow night and Wednesday night and Thursday night, and let's go really deep with persuasion and influence, neuro-linguistic programming style, and I'd love to hear your feedback on it too. All right, take care, everybody.